two types of sites. So what are sites? Sites are geographic groupings of devices, as you say here. They're logical groupings of devices based on geography. So a device can only belong to one site at a time. And there's actually two different types of sites. There's container sites, and these are for fleshing out the topology. The devices don't actually get assigned to a container site directly. Instead, they get assigned to a leaf site, which is where the devices actually live. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. So if we look at our sites, we see that we have, in this case, a whole topology, kind of a three-layer topology. From the root, it goes to region, country, and then site. So notice the difference in icons. Now, whether we use container sites at all is entirely up to us. And how we go about organizing this is entirely up to us. The only real caveat is a device cannot belong to more than one leaf site at a time. And so what we're going to do is we're going to design it as we believe appropriate, either just by creating container sites and leaf sites like so, or you can actually import a file in CSV or Excel format to create a whole hierarchy of sites very easily. And then for populating sites, we can go in and manually add devices to our particular sites, or we can add dynamic search criteria, and again, anybody who meets those criteria will be a member of the site. But do remember, a device can only belong to one site at a time. So, how do I put this? If we have a newly discovered device, when it's benchmarked, NetBrain will try to decide what site to assign it to. And if we don't have a if there's more than one site that it might meet the criteria, which one it winds up in is actually random. So that's not ideal. We can, in addition to sites, we can also have what are called device groups, which are logical groupings of devices according to whatever parameters we want. And again, we can statically assign devices to a group, dynamically assign devices to a group, and a device can belong to as many different groups at a time as you want. And pretty much any time you have the ability to narrow down a range of devices to do something with in the NetBrain platform, you'll have the option to narrow it down by site and by device group. So if there's is a better best practice is we want everything to be assigned to a device group. So we see anything here that is unassigned so far listed here, we want this to be 0. If we go under settings, if there's particular types of devices that we don't want NetBrain to ignore completely, we just don't want them in our sites for whatever reason, we can go ahead and select them by type here in the settings. But for individual devices that we don't want to be members of the site hierarchy, we can create a leaf site, usually right under the root, called, I call mine ignored devices, but whatever. And you can manually assign stuff to it so that they don't get added to the device. They don't get added to the sites. And as a matter of fact, you don't actually need container sites aside from the root if you don't want them. So taking a hands-on example, NetBrain has, I believe now, 6 offices scattered around the world. The last time I got a look at our internal NetBrain deployment briefly, which was quite a while ago, but they actually just had 6 leaf sites. They didn't bother with container sites. So if you have a more limited network like that, that's not a bad way to go about it. Okay. All right. So any questions about sites or anything we've discussed thus far, folks? Okay. So next is...
I'm sorry.
Oh, what's up?
Hey, so I might have missed it, but speaking of sites,
Hmm.
did, I was wondering if we're going to cover anything in a scenario, and I don't want to delay. I know this is closing up at 3, but a scenario where you have your network implementation, but the network you're trying to discover is remote, and in this case, is actually a client network. So I was just wondering about some methods of being able to discover that network on site. I know some of the previous versions, like versions, yeah,
Okay, so are we talking about dividing it up into sites specifically, or are we going back to talk about discovery?
it's more about discovery.
Okay, so we're probably going to wind up somewhere around the bottom of the hour with the actual class itself.
Got it.
Is it okay if we talk after that?
No worries. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, because yeah, I want to just kind of finish with this so we're not holding people too far past the bottom of the hour, although we're probably going to go over because my brain's been scattered. But anyway,
You got it, Matthew.
all right, no problem. But yes, I can absolutely talk about that a bit, at least in general principles. Okay, so once we've got our devices discovered, we've got them tuned to make sure we can talk to everybody. And usually, again, just to repeat myself, usually you perform an initial discovery and you have a whole raft of problems that need to be tuned. So you tune them and then you rediscover everything. And then you get more issues that were hidden behind the first issues and you fix those and you discover again. And usually you go around this loop a couple times before a new environment is completely discovered. So that's to be expected. Um, and then you're going to want to check out the fine tuning on a regular basis to correct any incidental issues that might come up from new devices or just change the network or whatever. And then you set up your site hierarchy according to whatever makes sense. So one point I did want to make that I forgot earlier, actually 2 points in regards to sites. So first of all, any changes we make in here are not actually going to take effect until we commit them. So make sure to commit any changes that you've made that you want to. But also you can just come in and horse around in here in your own environment. And as long as you don't commit your changes, you're not actually going to mess anything up. So feel free to play around like that. Just make sure not to commit unless you mean to commit. The other thing is that what hierarchy type makes sense for your sites, what organization, depends on what you're doing. So to take, this example is pretty classic. It's by region, by country, by city. That's fine. But to take another common example I've seen in we have a lot of clients that are municipalities here in the United States. And there, a very common thing is to sort by municipal department and then by location within the department. So, whatever makes sense for you. And particularly if you already have a geographic rubric for your organization's physical assets, try to conform to that if it makes sense, because that's usually everyone's used to thinking in those terms, and that usually makes it make instant sense to everybody. But whatever works is the important part. Okay. So once we have all that squared away, now we need to think about, because this is even before we've gathered detailed information about the devices. So in order to gather our detailed information, calculate our fully accurate topologies, that's another important point. After initial discovery, we're not going to have a really properly accurate network topology, particularly with L2, until we've run a full system benchmark. So benchmarks are how we gather our detailed information and then update our topologies and so forth. So we have what are called benchmark tasks. We also have scheduled discoveries, which is usually in the matter of scheduled rediscovery of devices, which is a vital part of system maintenance. So we'll talk about both of those. There's also what are called DVT parser tasks, scheduled QAP tasks. We're going to talk about all of that. So let's go ahead and we'll come back to this.